In the quiet morning light, Ethan was pulled from sleep by the unexpected crash of something falling in the hallway, a sharp sound that sliced through the stillness of the house like a reminder of everything they had avoided for months. He hurried toward the noise and found his stepmom, Claire, inside her bedroom closet, a place she usually kept shut as if it held a storm she wasn't ready to face. She was kneeling on the floor, surrounded by scattered sweaters, fallen boxes, and a mix of dust and memories that had settled there since his father passed away, making the closet feel like a room frozen in time. Ethan hesitated at the doorway, unsure if he should walk away or step in, because grief had made both of them careful around each other, like two people trying not to touch a wound that never healed. Claire didn't notice he was there at first, her side turned to him, her hands moving quickly through old belongings, her breath shaky, her eyes fixed on something deeper than the mess she was sorting. The sight struck him, not because she looked weak, but because she looked determined in a way he hadn't seen since before the funeral, as if she was searching for something important, something she had been scared to face. When he finally spoke her name, she jumped slightly, then tried to hide her surprise with a small, soft smile that didn't fully reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled, and Ethan could tell she had already cried before he arrived. She brushed hair from her face and wiped her hands on her jeans, but her shoulders remained tense, her movements too quick, too controlled, like someone forcing themselves to stay steady. He stepped closer and asked if she needed help, and for a moment she looked like she wanted to say no, like she didn't want him to see the fragile pieces of her heart spread on the floor. But then her expression softened, and without answering, she went back to searching as if the question had opened a door inside her but she wasn't ready to walk through it. Ethan crouched beside her, noticing how every item she touched felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Old shirts Ethan's dad once wore, a pair of hiking boots they had bought before a trip they never took, a box labeled winter stuff even though winter had already come and gone without being opened. The closet smelled faintly like his father's cologne, a scent that had always filled the house but now appeared only in small trapped pockets, surprising them with memories that hit without warning. Ethan hadn't stepped into this closet since the week after the funeral, when he and Claire had tried cleaning but stopped after only 10 minutes because every object felt like pulling out a thread that would unravel something too painful. Now, watching her move through the clutter, he sensed something different, something urgent, as if she had reached a point where holding on to the past hurt more than facing it. "I have to find something," she finally said, her voice soft but firm, her eyes sweeping across the piles in front of her like she was looking for a tiny spark in a sea of darkness. She didn't say what she was searching for, and Ethan didn't push. He simply started helping, lifting boxes, handing her items, brushing dust off old frames, trying to make the moment lighter even though everything about it felt heavy. The morning sun filtered through the small closet window, casting pale lines of light across the mess, making everything look sharper, clearer, more real than either of them wanted it to be. Claire paused often, touching a sleeve or smoothing the corner of a picture, her face shifting between pain and something like longing. Ethan realized then how much she had kept inside, how hard she had tried to stay strong for him even though she was hurting just as deeply. They hadn't talked much since the funeral, real conversations stayed locked inside, replaced by quiet dinners, quick nods, and long silences filled with things neither knew how to say. But in that small closet, with dust floating in the air and old memories scattered around them, the silence felt different. It felt like a place where truth might finally breathe. Claire suddenly stopped, her fingers resting on an unopened box buried behind old jackets. She pulled it out carefully, as if it might break, and when she opened it, Ethan saw a stack of faded letters tied with a thin blue ribbon. He recognized the handwriting immediately, his father's. Claire exhaled sharply, a soft, shaky sound that made Ethan's chest tighten. She lifted the letters slowly, holding them like something sacred, her eyes filling with a mix of sadness and tenderness. "I thought I hid these too well," she said quietly, half to herself. She untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and looked at the first envelope, her breath catching. Ethan didn't speak, he just stayed close, letting her move at her pace. The moment felt too delicate for words, too sacred for interruption. Claire placed the old letters beside her and dug deeper in the box, her movements growing faster as if she suddenly remembered something important. After a minute she whispered, "There's one missing." Ethan looked at her, confused. Claire pressed her hand to her mouth, thinking, trying to settle her breathing. "He wrote me one last letter," she said. "The night before his surgery. I hid it somewhere safe, somewhere I wouldn't lose it. But I can't remember where." Ethan felt the air shift, not darker, just heavier. The idea of a final message, unread and lost, felt like a weight neither of them had been ready for. Claire placed both hands on the floor to steady herself, closing her eyes briefly before continuing her search with renewed urgency. Ethan joined her fully now, opening boxes, checking corners, looking behind stacked bags, trying not to think about how important that letter must be, how much it probably held for her, for both of them. Time moved quickly as they worked, the closet growing more chaotic but somehow lighter, the weight of silence breaking piece by piece. Every now and then Claire would pause, wiping dust from her hands or holding something to her chest before setting it aside. Ethan could feel the tension in her, the hope, the fear, everything she had been trying to bury rising to the surface. It wasn't about the closet anymore. It was about the grief they had both locked away, the conversations they had pushed aside, the way they had lived around each other instead of with each other. There was something strangely healing about the shared search, even if they didn't say it out loud. And then, for the first time that morning, Claire looked at Ethan, not with the polite smile she used to hide her pain, but with honesty, with the tired vulnerability of someone who had carried too much alone. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. Ethan nodded, because there wasn't anything to say that could make the moment easier or heavier. He simply stayed, searching, helping, giving her the support she had been too kind, or too afraid, to ask for. In that messy, cramped space, surrounded by memories, Ethan realized something important. The two of them weren't broken from grief, they were just stuck. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward moving forward. The sound of shifting boxes, soft breaths, and faint sunlight filled the closet, and as Claire reached for another old container, her hands shaking but her eyes determined, Ethan felt the subtle beginning of something he hadn't felt in months: hope. The morning that began with a crash was slowly becoming the morning everything quietly, unexpectedly started to change. Claire worked through the boxes with growing tension in her hands, and Ethan could feel the urgency in the air as both of them knelt on the floor. The small closet crowding around them with its heavy smell of dust and old memories, each item carrying the echo of a life that felt unfinished. She had just opened a wooden crate, and inside it they found a small bundle of letters written in her handwriting from years before she married Ethan's father, letters she had forgotten she kept, letters filled with a younger version of herself who hoped and dreamed with bright eyes. Her breath trembled as she touched them, and Ethan could see how deeply the discovery shook her, not because the letters were a secret but because they reminded her of the woman she used to be, the one who had laughed louder and carried less weight on her shoulders. She traced the ink with her fingertips in a soft, nostalgic motion, and Ethan remembered how strong she had been during the hardest moments of the past months, trying to keep the house functioning while avoiding anything that reminded her too much of what she lost. "I thought I hid these too well," she whispered, her voice barely keeping steady, and Ethan could tell the memories were hitting her faster than she could handle. The closet felt tighter, almost as if the walls were leaning in, listening quietly to her heartbreak. Ethan stayed close, not saying much, understanding that this wasn't about finding things, it was about finally facing them. Claire placed the old letters carefully beside her and brought out more items from the crate, photos of winter trips, receipts from long-ago dinners, and notes written by Ethan's father that looked like everyday reminders but now felt priceless simply because of the person who wrote them. Her eyes softened, but behind that softness was something deeper: regret, love, tiredness, fear. Ethan could see all of it mixing beneath the surface, each emotion fighting for space in her heart. Then she paused, her hand stopping midair as she lifted a smaller box from the bottom of the crate. She looked at it as if it carried something dangerous and delicate at the same time. Slowly, she opened it, and there inside was a handful of letters in his father's handwriting, tied together with a worn ribbon that had lost its color. Ethan leaned closer, his own breath tightening in his chest, because he knew this wasn't something ordinary. Claire's hands began to shake, and she gently picked up the stack, her voice barely whispering, "These are his," even the way she said it felt heavy. She held the letters to her chest for a moment, closing her eyes as if trying to steady herself, and Ethan felt a small ache inside him, knowing she had been carrying all this grief alone while he stayed lost in his own world of hurt. Claire rested the letters on her lap and started opening the box further, searching with growing intensity. Ethan didn't understand at first why she looked panicked, but then she murmured, "It's not here." He frowned, confused, and she took a breath that sounded like it cracked something inside her. "There's one missing. The last one he ever wrote me." She said it like a confession, painful and trembling, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment press into him. Claire explained that the night before his father's surgery, he had written her a letter, one she had never opened because she feared what it might contain: hope, warnings, love, fear, all the things that became too hard to face once he was gone. She had hidden it somewhere in the closet, promising herself she would read it when she felt strong enough, but she never did, and the months that followed turned into years of avoiding this very space. Ethan understood now why she woke so early and why she had finally opened the closet after so long. She was searching for something she wasn't sure she was ready to face, but she knew she had to find it. The missing letter hung between them like a question neither knew how to answer. Ethan took a deep breath and joined her in searching, moving through boxes with faster hands, trying not to look at her too much because he knew she was fighting back emotions she didn't want to break in front of him. He could feel the shift in her, the urgency mixed with fear, as if the letter was the final puzzle piece she needed to move forward with her life. Every time she opened a box, her shoulders tightened, and every time she found nothing, the tension in her face deepened. Ethan tried to distract her by handing her small items he came across, an old wallet, a scarf, and an unused notebook, but she barely glanced at them, too focused on her goal. He understood that kind of desperation, the need to find something that feels like closure, something that might answer every question you've been too afraid to ask. The closet filled with movement, the two of them working side by side in a pace that felt almost frantic, the air heavy with dust and unsaid thoughts. Claire paused once, pushing her hair back and taking a shaky breath, staring at the messy floor as if she was trying to gather the pieces of herself that had scattered along with the belongings. Ethan saw her eyes glisten, but she wiped them quickly, trying to stay in control. She wasn't weak, she was exhausted. And Ethan realized how long she had been carrying the weight of being the strong one, the one who held the house together even when her heart was breaking. Without planning to, he said softly, "You don't have to do this alone." The words surprised both of them. Claire looked at him, really looked, and for a moment she didn't hide behind polite smiles or small reassurances. She let herself be seen, raw and hurting. "I know," she whispered, and that simple word felt like a door opening between them after months of living behind walls. She went back to searching, but something was different now. The heaviness wasn't only on her shoulders anymore. Ethan dug through the far corner of the closet, pulling out suitcases, old gift bags, broken hangers, anything that might hide a thin envelope. He tried to keep the pace fast, focused, determined, because he didn't want Claire to fall apart from disappointment. The closet, once untouched for so long, now felt alive with their movement, the air filling with the soft sound of rummaging and quiet breaths that carried years of grief. Even though the moment was painful, it also felt like something important was happening, something that might bring them closer, something that might heal a wound neither knew how to talk about. Claire's hands slowed for a moment as she picked up an old photo of her and Ethan's father, smiling on a beach trip from years ago. She brushed dust off the edge of the frame and whispered, "He always knew how to make me face things I ran from." Ethan swallowed the tightness in his throat and nodded, because his father had been that way, gentle but firm, loving but honest. After a long silence, Claire said something that made the moment heavier than before. "What if the letter says something I'm not ready to hear?" Ethan didn't know what the letter contained, but he knew Claire needed to read it, not just for closure, but because she had spent too long trapped between holding on and letting go. He told her gently, "Whatever it says, we'll face it together." She didn't answer, but she gave the smallest nod, and that was enough. The search continued, boxes opening and closing, items falling onto the carpet, sunlight shifting from warm to bright as the morning deepened. The urgency in Claire's movements grew sharper, her breathing quicker, as if the closer she got to finding the letter, the more she feared what it meant. Hope and fear kept twisting inside her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Ethan could feel how much this mattered to her, how deeply she needed to find something that belonged to the past but also held the key to her future. For months, she walked around with unspoken pain, living like she was surviving rather than living. Now, seeing her determined to face something she once ran from made Ethan realize she was stronger than she ever admitted. And as the two of them searched in that cramped closet filled with shadows and memories, Ethan felt something shift in the space between them, not in a romantic way, but in a human way, a way that made them feel like family again. Two people connected by loss and trying to heal from the same wound. The search wasn't over yet, but for the first time since his father's passing, Ethan felt like they were finally moving forward, step by step, box by box, towards something that might give them both the clarity they had quietly been longing for. Claire and Ethan kept digging through the piles as the minutes rushed by, the closet growing messier and tighter as they opened every box they had avoided for so long, and just when the search started to feel hopeless, Ethan spotted something thin wedged behind an old pair of his father's hiking boots, a white envelope slightly bent at the corner, dust sticking to it like forgotten snow. He reached for it carefully, his heart beating faster, and when he held it up, Claire froze, her breath catching in her throat as if the world stopped around her. She didn't move at first. She simply stared at the envelope as though it carried every piece of pain she had tried to bury and every piece of hope she had been too scared to touch. Ethan stepped closer and placed the envelope gently into her trembling hands, watching her eyes fill with a deep, raw emotion that made the moment feel fragile and sacred. Claire sank down to her knees again, not from weakness but from the weight of finally holding something she had run away from since the day her husband died, and Ethan knelt beside her because leaving her alone didn't feel right. She traced the faded ink of her name on the envelope, her fingers slow and shaky, as though she was afraid it might disappear if she touched it too quickly. For a moment, she didn't speak, she only breathed in short, uneven breaths, and Ethan realized she wasn't just afraid of what the letter might say, she was afraid of how it might change her. "You want me to step out?" Ethan asked gently, but Claire shook her head, her voice soft and unsure as she whispered, "No, stay. Please." He nodded and stayed still, giving her space yet standing as her anchor in the room filled with memories that felt louder than words. Claire opened the envelope with care so slow it felt like time stretched thin. The paper inside rustled softly, a small sound that struck Ethan's heart because it reminded him of his father's habit of writing notes even for simple things, reminders, jokes, sweet messages tucked into lunch bags. She unfolded the letter, the edges yellowed, the handwriting slightly faded, and as her eyes moved across the lines, her expression shifted through shock, grief, tenderness, disbelief, emotions crashing into each other faster than she could manage. Ethan waited, holding his breath without realizing it, and when she finally whispered the first sentence, her voice cracked. He knew. Ethan, he knew he might not make it. The words fell from her mouth with trembling honesty, her eyes filling with tears she didn't wipe away this time. She kept reading, her voice soft and fragile, explaining that Ethan's father had written about the surgery, not with fear but with acceptance, wanting to leave something that would give her strength if life didn't go the way they hoped. The letter wasn't dramatic or heavy, it was written with his father's usual gentle humor and calm understanding, telling Claire she was stronger than she thought and that she deserved a life filled with joy, laughter, and peace, not a life spent in grief or guilt. Ethan felt his chest tighten as he listened, fighting his own emotions because hearing his father's voice through her was like hearing a ghost speak with love instead of haunting. Claire continued reading, and then stopped suddenly, her breath breaking as she stared at the last lines. Ethan asked quietly, "What does it say?" Claire swallowed hard, her eyes widening with surprise that didn't look painful this time, but stunned and unsure. He wrote a name," she whispered. Ethan frowned, confused, and Claire said it slowly, like she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Liam Hart. Ethan blinked as the name stretched across his memory, a man from Claire's past, a close friend she used to laugh with, someone who quietly stepped back when she married Ethan's father. He hadn't thought of Liam in years, but now the name rolled into the air like a new thread weaving into the old ones. Claire explained that the letter said if life ever became too heavy, she should reach out to Liam, because Liam had always cared about her well-being before the world got complicated, because he was someone Ethan's father trusted to be honest, kind, and supportive if she ever needed a steady shoulder. Claire stared at the paper, stunned, almost whispering to herself, "I don't understand, he never told me he wrote this." Ethan didn't either, but the more he thought about it, the more it sounded like something his father would do, quietly caring, planning for the people he loved even when facing the worst. Claire pressed the letter to her chest, tears running down freely now, not with the same heavy sorrow she carried for months, but with a strange mix of relief, confusion, and something almost gentle. For the first time since the funeral, she looked like she wasn't drowning. She was still hurting, but something inside her opened, like a window letting in air after being closed too long. Ethan placed a steady hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Maybe you should call him." Claire looked up sharply, eyes wide, unsure, hesitant. "You think so?" Ethan nodded, not out of pressure or expectation, but because he genuinely wanted her to heal. "I think Dad wanted you to be happy. And maybe he knew you'd need someone you trust when the hurt got too heavy." Claire took in a slow breath, the kind that comes after months of holding everything inside. She brushed her tears with the back of her hand, her face tired yet lighter, as though the letter finally gave her permission to move forward instead of standing still in the same pain. For a moment, they sat together on the closet floor, surrounded by boxes, letters, memories, old clothes, and the quiet hum of grief shifting into something softer. Claire finally stood, carefully folding the letter and holding it close, as if it were a guiding light she never expected to find. Ethan stood too, watching her with a quiet understanding he hadn't felt before, realizing that this moment wasn't just about her grief, it was about both of them learning how to let go without forgetting. As they stepped out of the closet, leaving behind the dust and shadows of the past, the house felt different, still full of memories, but no longer suffocating. Claire placed the letter on her nightstand and took a long, steady breath. And then, just as she reached for her phone to put it away, the screen lit up. A name appeared. Liam Hart was calling. Claire froze, Ethan blinked in disbelief, and the phone buzzed with a timing too perfect to ignore. Claire's heart thudded loudly, a mix of fear, hope, surprise, and something deeper neither of them could name. She stared at the screen, breath caught in her throat, because the next chapter wasn't waiting to be found. It was calling her right now. And the moment hung in the air, filled with possibility. Claire stared at the glowing phone screen as Liam's name appeared, the sound of the ringtone filling the quiet room and freezing her in place, and for a moment she didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink, as if answering the call might pull her into a future she wasn't sure she was ready for. Ethan watched her carefully, feeling the weight of the moment as deeply as she did, knowing this call wasn't just about reconnecting with an old friend, it was the first real step toward healing, the step his father had quietly hoped she would take one day. The phone kept buzzing in her hand, vibrating softly like a heartbeat against her palm, and Claire felt her own heart racing with a wild mix of nerves, fear, hope, and disbelief. She finally lifted the phone, hesitating for a long second that felt like the whole world paused, and then she answered, her voice barely a whisper as she said, "Hello?" On the other end, Liam's voice came through warm, familiar, older, steadier, and the sound of it hit her with a rush of memories she hadn't expected, years of friendship, laughter, late-night conversations, support during times she didn't know she needed support. But his voice also carried something gentler now, something touched with concern as he said he had been thinking of her recently, that he didn't know why but he felt he should check in, and hearing that made Claire's eyes fill again because it felt like more than coincidence. Ethan stepped back quietly, not wanting to intrude but also wanting to stay close enough in case she needed him, and watching her talk, he felt something shift inside him, a mix of relief and the bittersweet feeling that comes when someone you care about finally finds a door out of their pain. Claire told Liam, with a trembling laugh, that she had just found a letter from her late husband, a letter mentioning his name, and Liam fell silent on the other end, stunned in the same way she had been minutes earlier. He spoke slowly then, telling her he had never known about the letter, never expected to be mentioned in it, and that he didn't want her to feel pressured by anything written there. But Claire shook her head even though he couldn't see her, feeling the truth rise inside her. This wasn't pressure, it was permission. She explained how she had avoided the closet for months, how she had tried to stay strong but had been drowning quietly, how finding the letter felt like stumbling into a light she didn't know she needed. Liam listened the way he always had, steady and patient, letting her speak until she ran out of breath, and when she finally fell silent, he said something so gentle it felt like a warm hand on her heart. You deserve to find that letter. And you deserve to feel alive again, Claire. Ethan watched her reaction, her shoulders loosened, her breath slow and deep, her eyes softened in a way he hadn't seen since before the funeral. After they talked for a few minutes, she promised they would catch up soon, maybe over coffee, maybe with no expectations at all, just two old friends reconnecting. When she ended the call, she kept the phone pressed to her chest for a moment, her eyes closed as though she needed a second to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Ethan stepped toward her and asked, "You okay?" She nodded, but her voice cracked when she said, "I think so. I think for the first time in a long time, I might be." He smiled softly, proud of her in a way he had never said out loud, and she sat on the edge of the bed, taking in slow breaths that felt lighter than anything she had breathed in months. She confessed she didn't know what the future looked like, didn't know if she was ready to start anything new, didn't even know if she had the strength to talk about her grief without breaking again. But she also said something else, something Ethan had been waiting to hear: "I don't feel alone anymore." The afternoon sunlight shifted through the curtains, landing gently on the nightstand where the letter now rested, no longer hidden, no longer something to fear. Ethan realized how much they had both changed in the past few hours. Grief hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, taking a new shape that didn't feel quite as crushing. Claire looked at the closet door, still open, the mess inside still scattered, but instead of looking overwhelmed, she looked ready. She told Ethan they would clean it together later, not because they needed to finish a chore, but because it felt like closing a chapter the right way. She stood, walked back into the closet, and this time, she didn't hesitate at the doorway. She stepped inside with steady feet, picking up the letters and photos, touching them with tenderness instead of fear. Ethan helped her again, moving through the items quickly and carefully, both of them working in a fast pace that felt different from earlier, less frantic, more purposeful, like they were finally controlling the moment instead of being swallowed by it. Claire placed her husband's letters in a small wooden box, tied the ribbon neatly, and set them on a shelf with a quiet, peaceful expression. She told Ethan the letters didn't make her sad anymore, they made her feel connected. Then she picked up the final letter, the one she had just read, and smiled, a small smile, weak but real, and said she would keep it somewhere she could see every day, as a reminder that she was allowed to live again, allowed to grow, allowed to move forward without guilt. Ethan felt something warm spread through him, a relief that made his chest feel lighter, because he had watched her struggle for so long, and seeing her find even a small spark of hope made everything else worth it. Once the closet was cleaned enough for now, they left it open on purpose, no more hiding, no more avoiding. They walked downstairs to the kitchen, and Claire made tea while Ethan sat at the counter, the atmosphere between them soft and calm, like the storm finally passed. She told him stories about Liam, about their friendship back in college, about how he had always been the kind of person who listened without judgment. Ethan realized then why his father had trusted Liam, because he was steady, reliable, a good person in the quiet kind of way that mattered most. Claire's phone buzzed lightly on the counter, a simple text from Liam saying he was glad she answered, that she deserved peace, and that he was there if she needed anything. Claire read it, smiled with a mix of gratitude and nervousness, and put the phone down gently, her fingers lingering on it for a second. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She just breathed. When she looked up at Ethan, her eyes were calm and she said, "I'm scared, but I'm also hopeful." Ethan nodded, because fear and hope often walked together when someone began to heal. They sat quietly for a while, letting the house settle into its new warmth, feeling the shift from grief to something gentler. For the first time since his father's passing, Ethan felt like their home wasn't stuck in sadness, it was moving again, slowly but surely. Claire placed her hand over Ethan's and whispered, "Thank you for finding the letter." He squeezed her hand lightly and said, "We found it together." And that was the truth. They had both been lost inside their pain, but together they had opened a door neither could face alone. Upstairs, the nightstand held the letter that started everything, a quiet reminder of love, loss, and the brave choice to keep living. And downstairs, Claire's phone buzzed again, another simple message from Liam asking if tomorrow afternoon worked for coffee. Claire stared at the screen, her breath catching, not with fear this time, but with the fragile hope of someone learning to feel again. And as she typed her reply, Ethan watched her with gentle understanding, knowing this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of another one.